Friends, welcome to the ecoChristian podcast, where we are exploring what it means to be Christian on planet Earth. I'm your host, Caleb Cray Haynes, and today, launching this podcast, we're talking flowers with my new friend, Rachel. I'm not sure that there's a better way to lead off these conversations than flowers. To say that creation is beautiful and valuable apart from just what it does for humans, but it is good in its own right as God called it to be. So, let's do it. Greetings, friends. For this episode, we are talking with Rachel Nafis. Rachel is a Californian, but from North Carolina originally, I believe. She's an urban flower farmer, owner and operator of Psalter Farm Flowers, and they, quote, provide local, responsibly grown flowers to San Diego flower lovers and florists, all the while healing blighted urban soil and bringing beauty to the inner city neighborhood. So you can't make this stuff up. This is really good. Welcome, Rachel. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, this is so good. Your story first, someone sent it to me maybe a month or two ago, where the LA Times did sort of a beautiful article there on some of the work that you're up to. And also I heard that GMA, Good Morning America, reached out to you, and then you're just too busy for them. So I feel very honored that you would have some time for us. So tell us about. Well, of course, we want to get into Psalter Farms and sort of the thing behind the thing there. But how did you get to, I guess, where you are today, becoming a Californian flower farmer?
Well, I was actually raised in West Michigan. I did come to California originally from Durham, North Carolina, but was raised born in the Midwest, raised in West Michigan, and my parents were kind of landscape gardeners. They did have a very beautiful yard and did grow a lot of flowers, but I kind of grew up in the suburbs and kind of in a stereotypical suburban neighborhood. And truly my interest in gardening happened after college, once I had moved to North Carolina. And I went to school and trained as an RN. Moved out to North Carolina, where I was living nearby my soon-to-be husband, Chris, while he was finishing up his master's at Duke. And kind of there's a very robust food culture in Durham. And one of my husband's housemates was a container gardener and was kind of just exposed to lots of local farms, started, shopping at the farmer's market, read several books that kind of piqued my interest in gardening. My husband, Chris, and I, we were married in 2010. We moved out to Southern California, and we rented a house with a very large backyard. And after all this reading, we built, I think, like 5 raised beds and added chickens, and kind of just were obsessed with all things kind of urban homesteading. We couple of years after that, we kind of launched a vegetable CSA. We fed about 10 families a week. It's very small, but we did chickens and bees and grew vegetables the year after that. And that was on an urban lot just outside of downtown San Diego.
Yeah, that's so much work.
It is a lot of work. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And it's hard. It's very challenging not to live where you're growing. Yeah. So after that, we actually were caretaking on a 40-acre ranch further east from downtown San Diego, where we raised pigs and did turkeys and had some milk goats. and tried to continue growing vegetables, but pretty much failed at that out there. There had been a fire prior in the area, and everything we planted was just eaten by rodents. So it was like a very imbalanced ecosystem at that time. So we pretty much packed up the farm. So that's after 2 years of kind of trying to make a go of farming as an occupation. We were actually working other jobs. I was still working as a nurse. My husband, Chris, was working as an inner city pastor. And we kind of gave up on farming. So we moved back to downtown, or near downtown San Diego.
Yeah. And you have kids at this point too, right?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay.
Yeah. So maybe I'm getting too far in the weeds.
No, I'm just collecting the story. No.
Yeah. So we basically moved back to the city. We're able to buy a house with a very large backyard where we continued to garden just for ourselves. We moved our 70 chickens from the ranch and slowly kind of,
oh my word,
pared down the flock, to what we really needed just to kind of keep our family in eggs. We brought the bees and put the beehive on the roof and kind of continued to do the kind of urban homesteading thing, try to grow all of our own produce, but kind of hit pause or kind of said goodbye to our dream of farming. At that time, we do have 3 kids, so we started having children and continued to kind of work the jobs we were trained for. Wow. Yeah. So a few years later, I added some dahlias to our regular vegetable garden and kind of got this idea to farm flowers. Obviously, I had never been able to shake this kind of deep desire to farm that I feel like is a sense of calling I have, and just like just something that I have not been able to, doesn't make sense, and I haven't been able to get away from. So I started my current flower farm in 2019, and this is my 5th growing season. And I've since resigned from my nursing job, and this is what I do full time now.
Okay. Congratulations. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Man, I really appreciate your story. And, and I think hearing, right, you gave me like 15 years in like 5 minutes, right? And so it's easy to miss in that the overarching growth that takes place and how much you learn and grow over a span of time, and how our lives get refined around these particulars. And it's really cool to hear your quote farm trajectory in that. And so it sounds like you've gotten a little bit of the flavor of, from the doing just the raised beds to the bigger thing, and now kind of sort of back to this sort of maybe an in between of both of them. That's really cool. So I guess tell us more about what you're doing now, particularly in the business. What is the business? What does it look like? And then we'll just go from there.
Cool.
Yeah.
Once I decided to transition our backyard vegetable garden to flowers, just quickly realized I didn't have enough space to operate a flower farm from our backyard. And I got the idea from a couple of farmers in British Columbia that were growing in their neighbors' yards and farming in their yards. So I quickly after that kind of decided to hatch this plan of expanding the farm via our neighbors' yards. So I think some of that came from my past experience of, we had tried the thing where, you get access to a lot of land and, we weren't able to grow out east, because of our rodent issues and other problems. So basically it was this idea to kind of live into what it would mean to farm actually where we live in the city. yeah, so to kind of invite our neighbors into that as a way of getting land access to land. So
Right.
anyway,
Yeah.
yeah, so I asked our neighbor across the street if I could grow in his side yard, which
Okay.
had like chest high weeds. He was an older gentleman at the time, wasn't able to care for his yard. He said yes, and that kind of gave me the courage to begin asking other neighbors. So I have currently eight different locations in our neighborhood where I grow flowers, and I can
Wow.
walk to all of them from our house. I grow for predominantly florists. So I grow for two flower shops that take most of my flowers, and then event florists that do weddings and other design work. And then I run like a 30-member bouquet subscription.
Mm.
And so that's kind of how I dole out the flowers. And
Yeah.
yeah, we cut about 1,000 stems a week. So I'm still fairly small, but kind of trying to find that sweet spot. I'm not interested in running a huge farm, but also want to have enough flowers to kind of keep the business running. So
that's great. I think that's one of the things that is beautiful about this kind of model, because it's reminiscent of, in my opinion, I think we really slide down the temptation, slippery slope often, and we want to scale this, we want to make it bigger. And in doing that type of sort of ethos in small businesses, you just lose so much, and all of a sudden you have to you're losing that neighborhoodness and that feel, and those relationships. And I imagine particularly the relationships for you in this sort of model where you're quite literally in your neighbors' yards and that sort of thing. So there's this, there's not just the actual ecosystem around that is being altered, but it's sort of the ecosystem of the neighborhood that's being altered. I wonder if you could speak to how maybe you've seen one or both of those change in the last 5 years, and also, have there been any neighbors who were just like NIMBY, like no flowers in my backyard or something?
Yeah. Well, I always have to be prepared when I ask somebody if I can grow in their yard for them to say no. And that's really just kind of the worst case scenario. So I always tell people that are interested in this model, like the worst that could happen is they're just going to say no. So I have had a few people say no, and they were just kind of weren't the right fit. One family laid down turf. I mean, so we kind of obviously have some differences in,
was this before you asked them? Yeah.
After.
So so they need like a refund or something on their
turf. Kind of hurts, but that's okay. But I mean, it's a lot to ask of my neighbors, so I also understand when people say no. I'm in their yards a lot, kind of in their private spaces working. The job is messy. I'm not like a landscaper, so things don't, the garden really has a life cycle to it where it kind of grows and expands, and then begins to kind of die back and set seed, and at different stages it's not always that neat and tidy looking. So yeah, I definitely understand when people say no, but then it also says a lot about the people who have said yes to me. I've noticed a lot of my neighbors where I grow, they're just very creative people, lots of artists, several people with disabilities that would love to be out gardening or in their yard, but are just not able to. So it's been fun to kind of see the commonalities between the houses I do grow. Just very inspired by my neighbors, because I'm just them saying yes to me and just being so open-handed with their space, and very generous. I literally couldn't do this without my neighbors. So and I'm trying to remember. I think there was a second part to your question.
No, it's okay. We'll dabble on, but I think maybe somewhere I read, maybe on your website or something, where it's kind of like the why flowers question. and as opposed to edibles or et cetera. Yeah, what maybe speak to some of that, because I feel like you said something about, not being about consumption or something.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's easy to say flowers don't matter because we don't, consume them. And we don't technically need them to survive, but I feel like we do need them to thrive, Beauty is very important. And that's why I think, gardening is very important. And obviously spending time in the natural world. And, these are the things that make our life meaningful and beautiful. And it's been interesting to switch from growing food, which, I love to eat delicious vegetables, picked from the backyard garden, but to switch to flowers, there's, something very like transcendent about growing flowers and being among flowers, working with flowers, and people, respond a little differently to flowers than food. I mean, it's been meaningful to see the way people kind of light up when flowers are around, and how they also, inspire other people. And, it's been meaningful to provide flowers for people at very, significant life circumstances, whether it be like the death of a loved one or new baby or, whatever that is. It's very special to provide flowers to kind of mark those very human moments. So I'm happy to be growing flowers. Yeah.
That's really great. I really love how you put that, and I love flowers because like you said, like they're not, it's not primarily here for our consumption. And that's what they sort of remind us of, I think, which is important. It's like God's means of reminding us that it's not all about you in kind of a backward way, maybe. That I think too often we think that creation exists just for human consumption, right? That creation revolves around humanity as the earth rotates around the sun or something. And so it's kind of the consider the lilies factor, I guess. How they grow, they neither toil nor spin, Jesus said, right? They just exist. They're just beautiful. And so, but flowers, right, in their fragrance and beauty, we, like you said, we put them on our tables, our bedsides, our celebrations, and even in these times of mourning. And they help sort of transcend, I think, our thinking about creation, right? They give to us, but also they remind us that creation is valuable just for creation's sake. And so I think that's actually a really good place for us to start, in having these kind of conversations, that it's not about necessarily what they do for us, even though they do things for us, because there's this sort of, I think maybe you said transcend, this transcendent beauty that seems to cross people's barriers in ways that, it's hard to name something else that does that. I guess, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, did the neighbors kind of get like a kickback for growing in their own yard? Is that?
Yeah. I try to give as many kickbacks as I can afford, but
that's probably oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say that's probably a hard thing to navigate.
It is kind of hard to navigate. That's I think why people aren't interested in doing what I'm doing. I've kind of chosen like a very relational model versus, paying a lot of money to lease land from, one, you would call it a rich landowner. And so what I'm doing is very messy. It definitely adds a dimension of work to what I'm doing, but then in return, I'm getting free access to land that I can access, that I can walk to from my house, which we've learned from our experience is very important to us. So, so we share eggs, I share flowers. Sometimes I pay a little bit for the space. It depends on kind of the needs of, the families or whatever. I do try to compensate for water usage. Some people donate their water. I mean, I look to thank people and give back, to them as much as I can, but mostly we're just developing a stronger relationship with the entire neighbor. It's really connected us to our neighbors in the entire neighborhood, especially because I'm out there, cutting all the time. Like I'm just physically present in the neighborhood outside. So that's been cool, but also my relationship with my garden host has become very, very deep and meaningful. To the man who gave me his first yard, he passed, and we were able to go to his funeral. And one of the other gentlemen that I grow in his front yard, he also passed, and we kind of ended up in this very intimate funeral experience with very few family and friends, and kind of realized, we're one of the few people you have, relationships in your life. So it's been very meaningful, and deeply meaningful. And, none of it kind of was planned or orchestrated. It just has kind of happened, over the years. And, so I try to thank people, but mostly we just kind of have become bonded together, and I think have learned to kind of help each other in kind of a natural way that happens when you're in deep relationships with people.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it really speaks, obviously the big theme here is this physical presence in the neighborhood, and I suppose if I were to try to name something particularly Christian about what you're doing, that feels very strongly coming to the surface, at least for me. And this sort of putting yourself out on a limb to be present in a neighborhood, in a community, and be not only present, but in a sort of interdependent relationship with people who were previously pretty much just strangers on a street, right? This is where it kind of begins. And to say that I'm going to be out in your yard, digging in your soil, and using some of your water, and we're gonna enter into a relationship where we give to one another, where we receive from one another, and that before you realize that you are crossing these other boundaries as well, these sort of metaphysical boundaries, these sort of relational boundaries. And again, the flowers are just sort of this, like God's means of grace that exists between you and these people. Tell us more about the name Psalter. Why did you choose that, and how does that play in?
Yeah. Well, my husband Chris is a pastor, so he actually chose the name for our farm when we were first growing vegetables. So we were Psalter Farm, and I tacked on flowers when I changed to flowers.
Yeah.
And when I basically, and he is no longer farming, so he support stuff. But so the Psalter comes from the Psalms, and basically is kind of how, I'll say we, because, he was obviously part of naming the farm, but how we see, just the act of gardening, in that it's just this very embodied way to live and to experience God in the world. And then all the, kind of emotions that are tangled up in that, that we see kind of laid out for us in the Psalms, grief and rage and hard work and toil, and but then also, songs and poetry of praise, and just gratitude, and this beautiful poetry. So that's just kind of how we see that the act of gardening and being in the garden, receiving from the garden. And then, as I've transferred that to like actually farming, and, a business that supports our family, I still do feel that very deeply. I just feel very connected, to the garden. And it's kind of been how I kind of ground myself in life and through the seasons. And so, yeah, that's kind of what the name encompasses for us.
That's great. That's really cool. Yeah, I think seasons is it's sort of a beautiful way to think about it all, I suppose, thinking about, the Psalter and the Psalms and there's so many Psalms that are joyful, but there's even so many more that are just Psalms of lament. Wow, yeah, flowers do really embody that. Yeah. I mean, 10 points to Chris for coming up with the name. So yeah, I think about that. Ironically, I was marinating on this conversation and I was thinking about my own flower story. And I'm realizing now we're going to have to do a hashtag name your flower story and send it in to us. But, as a kid, for whatever reason, I guess maybe because we had a lot of friends and relatives. But long story short, I felt like I was just like at a funeral like all the time. Like I went to so many funerals as a kid. Didn't realize this was weird until I got older and talked to other people. They're like, "No, I've been to like 2 funerals." And I was like, "What, bro? I got licensed in funeral." No. But which is a weird thing to say. But anyway, my point is that there's so many flowers at funerals. And I actually got to the point where I did not like the smell of flowers because all I could think about were these weird places where there was coffins and dark red curtains and low lighting and this smell. Because, they say, right, fragrances and smells are one of those most powerful receptors, right? Maybe you haven't heard this, or maybe this is common knowledge, but that really recalls memories for us. Mm-hmm. And so that's been a part of my redemption because I love growing things. I love growing flowers. And so sort of like working with my brain's plasticity to enjoy flowers again. But they do have this powerful sort of means of kind of like we're talking about, I guess, being things of hope and praise and lament. I wonder if there are some other stories from your interactions with the neighbors that you'd be willing to share of how you've seen a little bit of saltering, quote unquote, been over the last 5 years.
Yeah. I think one of the most significant experiences was probably, so I grow in a front and backyard of my neighbor, Tom, and his brother, who's since passed. He was in a hospital bed that happened to be by their front window. So he, for an entire year, got to look out the window and see me work in the garden, and he was bedbound. So that was very meaningful experience for me. And feels very significant, probably one of the most significant things that's happened from the farm. It's been fun to hear, a fairly new garden house, what she's been saying more recently, her name is Sophie, the garden host, is just that having the garden has made her notice flowers more. Like when she's just out and about or traveling or whatever, like she's just seeing the world differently. And I think I like to take pictures, and she's saying like, wow, you've really kind of opened my eyes to the beauty in the city. So, I think, and that's what I hope, one of my hopes to kind of communicate is that anyone can experience the beauty of the garden wherever you are. And so for us, that means we're in like a very like hard urban landscape. Just our neighborhood is not very beautiful. So it's just lots of concrete and asphalt. We don't have many trees. We're in a low income neighborhood. And obviously we're in Southern California where it doesn't rain much, but we, just there's not a lot of greenery here. So, but there is a way you can creatively kind of experience the beauty of the garden kind of wherever you are. So it's been fun to kind of have her kind of pick up on that as a garden host. Another garden host said recently she just loves coming home and seeing the flowers when she comes home from work. And one of my other garden hosts is a brain cancer survivor. And she's interested in gardening, but doesn't know how. So that's been fun to kind of teach and talk with her more about growing. And so those are kind of some of the more significant experiences. I think I hope to kind of in the content I put out into the world, like as a business owner, I think it's been meaningful for florists to kind of hear the story of how their flowers are grown, because they're they want to be connected to, they're making art with flowers, but then there's this huge break between who grew them, where, and under what circumstances, and then, usually the many steps that they take to get to the final endpoint, to the florist, and then finally to like the customer or, consumer or whatever. So I think it's been meaningful for them to kind of be drawn into the story of a farm or garden, and to kind of learn more about, how their flowers, their medium is grown. Because I think they ultimately want to be more sustainable. And it's difficult to do that in that industry. So.
Wow. Yes. I'm very curious about that as well. You said, where you wrote about your intention sort of in your mission statement, and you name healing, right? And so there's this sort of like you're naming this sort of like communal sort of healing, relational healing, neighborhood healing, and then there's sort of like we're talking about the actual healing of soil, and so what does that look like? I guess I know enough just to be a little guilty, and so I don't know fully how the flower quote industry works. I do know if I go down to the grocery store, decide to buy cut flowers there, I don't feel necessarily good about that, because there's all of this that's just like all the other products are just sort of hidden from our sight of where are they from, what kind of pesticides were used, what kind of soil do they represent, what is their footprint. So generally for us Americans, and probably that's sort of a blanket statement depending on where you live, but yeah, could you tell us a little bit about the flower quote industry there, and then maybe a little bit about your own growing technique and so forth?
Yeah. Well, I don't have any impressive statistics to share from memory, but
yeah.
Predominantly most flowers, we were at, outside of a flower shop yesterday, getting pizza. And I noticed like all of his cardboard boxes, and they all said grown in Colombia. And that's pretty typical, that things are being shipped, from overseas or, far off countries. And then if you consider, the footprint of that, and then also considering the conditions of the workers in those countries and the pesticide use. And then also because it's very difficult to grow, flowers have to be pretty much perfect. So a lot of, they use a lot of pesticides on flowers. And then, which also, if you touch them, we're also,
wow.
Florists that work with flowers all day, I mean, they're coming in contact with those pesticides as well, but, which makes me worried. But yeah, and then, worker conditions, and then also the impact of the pesticide use on communities. And, there's been a lot of pictures of birth defects and other things. So, it's not great. I think there's more awareness about the importance of local flowers. I think florists are hungry for that. But the flower industry is a big one. And also, it's hard to replace people's, very strong desire for, a greenhouse rose grown, in Colombia or whatever. So, so I work quite different here than that. So I'm a no-till farm. Technically, I couldn't really even be a tilled farm if I wanted, because my gardens are so small. Like there's nothing, there's no getting any machinery in there. But I mean, we do all the work by hand, obviously. But so I'm kind of a soil. I consider my kind of farming mentality practices are just very soil focused or soil first. So I always try to care for my soil and believe that will in turn mean good, healthy crops, and even therefore like plants that have more disease and pest resistance when they're just kind of when you take care of the soil and disturb it as little as possible. So so I do lots of things to take care of the soil. We use a lot of mulch, and that's also to kind of retain water, as well as we're kind of grow in a very like under dry conditions here. So I use lots of mulches, lots of urban waste compost that I get from our local landfill, and which is now coming from people's greenery bins, which is exciting for us. Wow. They're able to, they're accepting food waste for the first time. So I'm pretty excited to get like my first round of compost this winter that will have had some, good food in it. But so lots of compost, lots of mulches. We try to disturb the soil as little as possible. And the belief behind that is that the microbial communities of the soil, like fungal, mycelial networks, basically, anytime you disturb your soil, you're actually destroying those organisms. And that is what actually creates the good soil. So we try to kind of feed those communities as much as possible, protect the soil, keep it moist, and trying to grow as many perennials as possible. I'm moving towards growing more California natives, which I'm pretty excited about, introducing those into the local florist culture here, and hoping people will begin to design with those more. Those are some of the things we do. We use manure from our chickens and kind of keep the loop as closed as possible. I don't use a lot of inputs, also because I can't afford a lot of inputs. So we are kind of, pretty old school. Like what I'm doing is basically how you would have seen someone farming in the early 1900s or something. You know what I mean? Like we're using manure and compost and mulch. So
it's almost as if the earth was sort of like naturally wants to do this on its own, if we will give it the time and the space and the love to do it, right? It's almost as if it were created that way. I love talking about that. And if I'm resisting the temptation right now to get all down into the microbial stuff, because that's its own thing. So I'm a vegetable gardener, but I'm kind of lazy about it, and I no till. But it's kind of like whatever time I can spend out there, it's out there. But otherwise, it's got to kind of survive on its own. But now I'm really considering, right? Maybe I should just do some more flowers, right?
Yeah.
And obviously, our growing seasons are quite different from yours. And you're probably, are you getting ready to kind of get in your off season? Is there an off season?
There isn't, but I've made an off season for myself. So
There you go.
Yeah,
There
the
you go.
seasons are pretty deep in my, Midwestern blood. So
Yes.
I
Yes.
demand that there will be a winter season.
Yes. There you
So
go. As
yeah,
it should be. Let it rest.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, man, I appreciate you sharing all of that. Your whole, well, your life, your business model, it's just really encouraging. It's really cool to see how you're in relationship with these neighbors. But like you're saying, you're also in relationship with your soil, in particular, with these flowers, right? Just as we all are. And I think that's sort of hitting home for me and talking with you today is as I'm sort of like launching this podcast and we're getting in this out there. I feel like this is a really great quote unquote come to Jesus thing for us to marinate on or germinate on, however you want to go there,
Mhm.
is that this is not about us, I guess, but it's about being in relationship with all things as God created it to be. And I think that's what's beautiful here. And, it's not just about me getting whatever flower I want at any time of the year I want, right? We want our Easter lilies blooming at Easter. We want our, what are the things we always want at Christmas? What are the red? They're
Poinsettias.
Yes, thank you. They're right. We're getting all those from South America, just right on time for Christmas. And so I think about how we sort of we're even colonizing our flowers to be where we want, when we want them, what color we want them. And I love your point about the chemicals and the pesticides. I really hadn't thought about that in terms of flowers as much of, and the fact that people are just handling those by the thousands is pretty wild to think about. Yeah, so thank you for sharing all that. It kind of reminds me. I feel like there's a good parable in here somewhere, right? I mean, the kingdom of heaven is like a flower sower who goes into urban blight and grows beauty or something. Jesus was always throwing down on the agriculture and the seed parables. So you're in the mix somewhere. You're in the mix. So I think we got to get you a parable. Well, as we sort of end this, wrap up this conversation, I like to give people at least something personal, some personal practical application at the end. And I think in our conversation, it feels very self-evident. But right, let's grow some flowers. Maybe what's if you have a good first step or something of how one can get into this, or what's a good place for us to start? Maybe any advice you might have for our listeners.
Well, I think something that took me many years to kind of learn and kind of claim for myself is that, whatever the stereotypical story or path that most people take, like you don't have to take that path. There's always another path and that can meet you wherever you're at, like wherever in life you're at. So for me, that meant farming in the context of a city in my neighborhood when I thought I would need to live, in a more kind of rural, stereotypical farm environment. So, so I would say kind of open your eyes and try to look at things from a different angle and think creatively. And I think there are lots of ways to garden or just experience the garden or to grow things wherever you are. And don't be afraid to ask people to use their space, that the worst they can say is no. Consider doing things differently, and consider not having to be in control. And what would that look like? So yeah, I think those are the main things. And then I would just say, take time to be in the garden, to be in whatever space you're living near that kind of represents the natural world, and take time to observe and appreciate the beauty of the natural world wherever you are, and find a way to do that. So I think those are all things that I am kind of inspired to do daily, and am very kind of passionate about. And I hope that for other people too, because I think it can bring a lot of meaning and kind of a sense of kind of grounding to our everyday life.
That's what's up. That's great. Cool. So how can we connect with you? Do you consult or anything like that? If people are like, hey, can we pay you for an online consultation or something? Or
well, I have gotten enough requests for consults. I do Zoom consults for an hour, and I do those in my off season. So my flower growing season ends October 1st. So then I have those kind of scheduled during my off season. So you can check my website for those dates. The best way to interact with me is on Instagram, because that's where I am at for my business. So I would love to interact with you there. I'm Psalter Farm Flowers on Instagram.
Great. Well, thank you, Rachel. This has been, I was going to say fruitful, but I feel like maybe I should lean into a different, this has blossomed, my heart here. And so until next time, my friends, thanks for listening.
May you, friends, like flowers, be God's means of blessing to the world. Help us get the eco-Christian word out. Click that follow button and share this episode with a friend. Also, if you could find it in your heart to leave a review, that would be what's up. You can find more about Psalter Farm Flowers in the show notes, and follow us on Instagram at ecoChristianpodcast. Grace and peace.